There is a silence that speaks louder than words, a solitude that does not isolate, but rather awakens. Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychological minds of the 20th century, did not fear being alone. In fact, he embraced it. But why? Why did he, a man who studied the depths of the human psyche, seek refuge in solitude rather than the company of others? The answer lies in a truth that many fear to confront. Solitude is not emptiness. It is transformation. Jung believed that true self-discovery does not happen in the noise of the world, but in the quiet conversations we have with ourselves. He saw solitude not as loneliness, but as a gateway to the unconscious, a sacred space where the masks we wear dissolve and we stand face to face with who we truly are. It is in aloneness that we begin to hear the whispers of our soul, unfiltered by society's expectations, untouched by external noise. But in a world that glorifies constant connection, stillness can feel unnatural, even terrifying. Think about it. When was the last time you sat in complete silence, without distractions, without reaching for your phone, without seeking validation from others? Most people avoid solitude because it confronts them with a truth they are not ready to face. The moment we are alone, the suppressed thoughts, the unresolved emotions, the forgotten dreams start surfacing. And that is precisely why Jung considered solitude essential, not as a form of escape, but as a journey inward, a descent into the deeper layers of the self. But solitude is not just about reflection. It is also a source of immense creative power. Jung himself withdrew to his lakeside retreat, Bollingen Tower, where he spent time in deep introspection, writing, sculpting, and exploring his unconscious mind. He understood something most people overlook. Solitude is not a void. It is fertile ground for self-realization. Yet, in a society that equates being alone with being lonely, how do we learn to embrace the power of solitude rather than fear it? Most people are terrified of silence. The moment external noise fades, an internal storm begins. A flood of thoughts, emotions, and unresolved conflicts that demand attention. This is why solitude is often mistaken for loneliness. It forces us to confront what we spend our lives running from. Carl Jung understood this fear, but instead of avoiding it, he leaned into it. He saw solitude as a necessary confrontation, a mirror that reflects back the parts of ourselves we would rather ignore. In today's hyper-connected world, we are conditioned to fill every moment with distraction. Social media, endless entertainment, constant conversations. Everything is designed to keep us engaged with the external world. But Jung believed that true understanding of the self does not come from external validation. It emerges from within. He warned that without moments of deep solitude, we risk losing ourselves in the expectations of others, mistaking collective identity for personal truth. Jung's own life demonstrated this belief. Despite being a public intellectual, he regularly withdrew from the world to be alone with his thoughts. He built Bollingen Tower, his retreat by the lake, as a space free from societal influence, where he could engage in deep introspection and creative expression. He saw solitude as a sacred state, one where the unconscious mind speaks most clearly. But the question remains, if solitude is so essential, why do so many fear it? The answer lies in the nature of the human psyche. The moment we are alone, our subconscious begins to speak, revealing emotions, desires, and fears that we often suppress. This can be uncomfortable, even painful. Yet, as Jung understood, it is only by embracing this discomfort that true self-awareness begins. Solitude, then, is not about escaping the world. It is about returning to oneself. Jung believed that within every individual exists a vast, uncharted territory, the unconscious mind. This is the realm of forgotten memories, suppressed emotions, and the symbols that shape our lives. But accessing this deeper self requires something rare in modern life: stillness. In solitude, the layers of social conditioning begin to peel away, allowing us to perceive the hidden forces that drive our thoughts and behaviors. To Jung, solitude was not merely an absence of people, it was a ritual of self-discovery. He often spoke of the necessity of withdrawing from the collective mindset in order to engage with the deeper dimensions of the psyche. The noise of everyday life keeps us distracted, preventing us from accessing the unconscious. But in solitude, the unconscious rises to the surface, revealing insights and truths that would otherwise remain buried. Consider the great minds throughout history. Philosophers, artists, scientists. Many of them sought solitude not because they disliked people, but because they understood that creativity and deep insight emerge in moments of undisturbed reflection. Jung himself used solitude as a tool for psychological exploration, recording his visions, dreams, and inner experiences in what later became the Red Book, a deeply personal record of his journey into the unconscious. But the path of solitude is not always gentle. When the distractions fall away, we may be confronted with parts of ourselves we would rather avoid. Old wounds, repressed fears, hidden insecurities, they all surface in the quiet. Yet, as Jung saw it, this confrontation is necessary. Without it, we remain strangers to ourselves, trapped in the illusion of the persona, the mask we wear to fit into society. One of Jung's most profound insights was the distinction between the persona and the true self. The persona is the mask we wear to navigate society. It is the version of ourselves that seeks approval, adapts to expectations, and plays the roles assigned to us. But beneath this carefully constructed facade lies something far more authentic: the true self, the unfiltered essence of who we are. And solitude, Jung believed, is the key to uncovering it. Imagine a person who spends their entire life surrounded by others, constantly engaged in social interaction, always performing. Their identity becomes entangled with external validation. Who they are is shaped by how others see them. They may never ask themselves, "Who am I when no one is watching? What remains when I strip away my roles, my obligations, my need to be liked?" These are uncomfortable questions, but Jung argued that without solitude, they often go unanswered. Jung himself experienced this struggle. As a young man, he was deeply involved in the psychoanalytic movement, mentored by Sigmund Freud, and immersed in academic circles. But as his ideas evolved, he felt increasingly constrained by the expectations placed upon him. Breaking away from Freud and mainstream psychology was not just an intellectual decision. It was a deeply personal act of individuation, a reclaiming of his own truth. And to do this, he needed solitude. He withdrew, spending time in deep reflection, engaging with his unconscious mind, and documenting his visions. This period of isolation was not a retreat. It was a necessary journey toward his authentic self. But solitude does not only reveal who we are, it also reveals who we are not. When we are alone, we begin to see the artificial layers of our identity, the aspects of ourselves that exist only for the approval of others. The businessman who realizes his ambition was never truly his own. The artist who sees that their work has been shaped more by trends than by inner vision. The person who suddenly understands that the life they have built is not the one they truly desire. These revelations can be unsettling, even painful, but they are also liberating. Because once we recognize the false self, we can begin the process of returning to something real. If solitude is so powerful, why do so many resist it? The answer is simple. Transformation is uncomfortable. Jung believed that the process of individuation, becoming one's true self, requires confrontation with the unconscious, and this is not an easy path. In solitude, we come face to face with the parts of ourselves we have ignored, denied, or buried. We meet our fears, our regrets, our unfulfilled desires. And yet, within this discomfort lies the greatest opportunity for growth. Think of solitude as an alchemical process. In ancient alchemy, transformation required breaking down a substance before it could be purified and reborn. The same is true of the human psyche. When we step away from the distractions of the world, we enter a state of psychological dissolution. Our identities, our beliefs, our conditioned responses begin to disassemble. But this breakdown is necessary because from it comes something new. The person who emerges from solitude is never the same as the one who entered it. Jung himself described this process through his own experiences at Bollingen Tower. In this self-created sanctuary, he engaged in deep introspection, creative expression, and symbolic work. He carved inscriptions into stone, wrote about his dreams, and allowed his unconscious to guide him. This was not mere isolation. It was an intentional, transformative solitude, a process of stripping away the inauthentic and reconnecting with the deepest layers of the soul. But solitude does not require a retreat into the wilderness or a complete withdrawal from society. It can begin in small ways. Moments of silence in the morning, time spent journaling, walks alone without distractions. The key is intention. When solitude is embraced consciously, it becomes a powerful force for self-discovery. It allows us to hear the quiet voice within, the one so often drowned out by the world. And so, the question remains, when was the last time you were truly alone? Not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. Not escaping into distractions, not filling the silence with noise, but sitting with yourself, allowing whatever arises to surface. Because in that space, beyond the masks, beyond the noise, beyond the persona, you may just find something extraordinary. You may find yourself. From the moment we are born, we are told who we are. Society hands us a name, a role, a set of expectations. We are shaped by culture, by family, by the silent pressures of belonging. But deep within, there is something that remains untouched by all of this. A self that exists beyond conditioning, beyond the masks we wear. Carl Jung called this journey toward our true self-individuation, and he believed it was the most important task of a lifetime. Individuation is not self-improvement. It is not about becoming a better version of the person society wants you to be. It is about becoming who you were meant to be. Whole, undivided, true to your essence. It is the process of integrating the unconscious parts of yourself, the pieces that have been ignored, denied, or suppressed. And this process is not easy. It requires breaking away from collective expectations, standing apart, and embracing solitude, not as isolation, but as self-exploration. Jung believed that most people never achieve individuation because they never question the identities they have inherited. They live out scripts written by others, following paths that were never truly their own. They suppress their real desires, their fears, their contradictions, all in an attempt to fit into a mold that was never designed for them. But the cost of this conformity is immense. To deny the true self is to live in quiet suffering, haunted by a sense of incompleteness that no success or approval can fill. So, how do we begin the process of individuation? Jung's answer was simple, yet profound. We must turn inward. We must listen to the hidden parts of ourselves, the dreams, the impulses, the voices that we have silenced. We must step away from the collective and dare to walk alone. Because it is only in solitude that we can hear the whisper of our own soul, calling us back to wholeness. From childhood, we learn that certain parts of ourselves are acceptable, while others must be hidden. We are praised for being obedient, for following the rules, for fitting into the expectations placed upon us. And so, we adapt. We construct a persona, a socially acceptable mask that allows us to navigate the world. But beneath this mask, something else exists. Something raw, untamed, and deeply real. The process of individuation is the process of taking off the mask and embracing what lies beneath. But this is terrifying. Because the moment we remove the mask, we expose ourselves, not just to the world, but to our own deepest truths. What if the person we have pretended to be is nothing like who we really are? What if we have spent years, even decades, building a life that does not align with our soul? These are the questions that individuation forces us to face. Jung warned that suppressing our true self comes at a high cost. When we deny parts of ourselves, they do not disappear. They retreat into the unconscious, where they fester. This repression creates inner conflict, anxiety, and a sense of disconnection from life. It is why so many people feel lost, restless, or unfulfilled, even when they have achieved everything they were told would make them happy. They are living as a fragmented version of themselves, disconnected from their own essence. But the alternative, embracing individuation, requires great courage. It means being willing to disappoint others, to break away from societal expectations, to face the unknown within. It means accepting that we are not just the person we show to the world, but also the shadow, the dreamer, the seeker. Individuation demands radical honesty. It asks us to look at ourselves fully, without illusion, and to integrate all that we find. Only then can we become whole. Why is solitude so essential to individuation? Because the journey to the true self cannot be taken in the presence of constant noise. In the company of others, we are always performing, adjusting, adapting, responding to external stimuli. But in solitude, we have the rare opportunity to drop the performance and listen to what is actually happening within. Jung himself understood this deeply. He withdrew to Bollingen Tower, his secluded retreat, not to escape the world, but to reconnect with himself. There, away from expectations and distractions, he allowed his unconscious to rise to the surface. He recorded his dreams, engaged in creative work, and explored the depths of his psyche. This was not isolation. It was individuation in action. But solitude does not mean cutting oneself off from the world forever. Rather, it is about creating space to reflect, to process, to integrate. It is about stepping outside the collective mindset long enough to hear your own thoughts, your own truth. Without these moments of aloneness, we risk being swept away by the tide of societal conditioning, losing ourselves in the expectations of others. Yet, for many, solitude is uncomfortable. The moment the distractions fade, they are left with their own unresolved conflicts, their hidden fears, their unfulfilled desires. But Jung saw this discomfort as necessary, because what emerges in solitude is not just the darkness we have avoided. It is also the light, the dreams, the creativity, the forgotten parts of ourselves that are waiting to be reclaimed. Individuation is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming real. And that journey begins in the quiet space of the self. Individuation is not a destination. It is not a goal that can be reached and checked off a list. It is a lifelong unfolding, a continuous process of self-discovery and integration. There is no final version of the self, only deeper and deeper layers to uncover. And this is what makes the journey so powerful. For Jung, individuation was about wholeness, not perfection. It was about accepting all aspects of oneself, the light and the shadow, the known and the unknown. It was about learning to live authentically, free from the need to conform. But this is not a one-time revelation. Life constantly presents us with new challenges, new experiences that force us to evolve. Each stage of life requires us to re-examine who we are and what we believe. Individuation, then, is an ongoing process of becoming. And yet, many resist this path because it requires stepping into the unknown. It means questioning old beliefs, breaking free from outdated identities, and embracing the uncertainty of transformation. But Jung reminds us that the alternative, staying trapped in a false self, is far more painful. To live without individuation is to live half a life, disconnected from one's true purpose. So, ask yourself, are you living as your true self, or are you still wearing a mask? Have you taken the time to listen to the deeper parts of your being, or are you drowning in external noise? The journey of individuation is not easy. There is a part of you that you refuse to see, a side that you have buried under layers of politeness, expectations, and denial. It is the part of you that feels anger, jealousy, insecurity, the part that is capable of cruelty, selfishness, and destruction. Carl Jung called this the shadow, and he believed that ignoring it is one of the greatest dangers to the human soul. But here is the paradox. The more we suppress the shadow, the more power it has over us. What we refuse to acknowledge does not disappear. It festers in the unconscious, shaping our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in ways we do not understand. It manifests in sudden outbursts of anger, in patterns of self-sabotage, in the judgments we cast upon others. We see our own denied flaws reflected in the world around us, but we are blind to the fact that they originate from within. This is why solitude is terrifying for so many. When the distractions of the world fall away, we are left alone with our shadow. The unresolved wounds, the hidden fears, the parts of ourselves we pretend do not exist, they all rise to the surface. And without the noise of everyday life to drown them out, we are forced to confront them. Jung understood that facing the shadow is not about eradicating it, but about integrating it. He believed that true self-awareness requires us to acknowledge our darkness, to accept that we are not purely good or purely evil, but a complex mixture of both. Only by bringing the unconscious into the light can we reclaim the parts of ourselves that we have lost. And this process, the painful, necessary confrontation with our own darkness, begins in solitude. From childhood, we are taught which parts of ourselves are acceptable and which are not. We learn that some emotions, like happiness, kindness, and obedience, are rewarded, while others, like anger, defiance, and vulnerability, are punished. And so, we adapt. We push the unacceptable parts of ourselves into the unconscious, pretending they do not exist. But what we repress does not vanish. It waits. The shadow is formed in these hidden places. It is made of the traits we reject, the emotions we refuse to feel, the desires we are ashamed of. And because we are unwilling to face these aspects of ourselves, they find other ways to express themselves, through projection, through destructive behaviors, through patterns we cannot seem to break. For example, consider the person who prides themselves on being kind and selfless, yet secretly resents others for taking advantage of them. Their repressed anger does not disappear. It leaks out in passive aggression, bitterness, or silent suffering. Or the person who believes they are rational and unemotional, yet constantly finds themselves overwhelmed by sudden fits of rage or anxiety. Their emotions, denied for so long, erupt uncontrollably. Jung believed that the more we reject the shadow, the more it controls us. But facing it requires something few are willing to do: deep, honest introspection. It requires solitude. Because in solitude, there is no one left to blame, no distractions to hide behind. There is only you and the truths you have been avoiding. And when you finally look into the mirror of the self, you may be shocked by what you see. Why is solitude essential for confronting the shadow? Because in the presence of others, we are always performing. We maintain our personas, filtering our thoughts and emotions to fit into social expectations. But in solitude, the mask falls away. There is no audience, no one to impress or deceive. There is only raw, unfiltered truth. Jung himself withdrew into solitude to engage in this process. In the Red Book, he documented his personal journey into the unconscious, recording visions, dialogues with archetypal figures, and encounters with his own shadow. He understood that self-awareness does not come from external validation. It comes from the willingness to descend into the depths of one's own psyche. Shadow work, the process of integrating the unconscious, requires a deep commitment to inner exploration. It involves asking difficult questions. What emotions do I suppress, and why? What qualities in others trigger me, and what do they reveal about myself? In what ways do I deceive myself to avoid facing uncomfortable truths? These are not easy questions, and the answers are often uncomfortable. But without this self-examination, the shadow remains in control, dictating our lives from beneath the surface. Solitude provides the space for this confrontation. It forces us to sit with our discomfort, to process emotions we have long ignored, and to reclaim the parts of ourselves that we have cast aside. But this journey is not about dwelling in darkness. It is about understanding it, learning to recognize our shadow without being consumed by it. Because when we integrate the shadow, something incredible happens. We stop projecting it onto the world. We become less judgmental, less reactive, more whole. We gain access to the hidden strengths and creativity buried within the unconscious. And most importantly, we begin to live with a newfound authenticity. Jung did not believe that the shadow was purely negative. He saw it as a vital part of the self, one that, when integrated, becomes a source of immense power and transformation. Because within the shadow lies not only our fears and weaknesses, but also our hidden potential. The desires we have suppressed, the emotions we have ignored, the instincts we have denied, these are not just obstacles. They are untapped sources of energy, creativity, and depth. Think of the artist who suppresses their darker emotions, fearing they are too intense. When they finally confront their shadow, they unlock a depth of expression they never knew they had. Or the person who has spent their life being agreeable, afraid of conflict. When they integrate their shadow, they find their voice, their assertiveness, their ability to set boundaries. The shadow, once embraced, becomes an ally. But this transformation does not happen passively. It requires active engagement with the unconscious, through journaling, through meditation, through deep introspection. It requires solitude, not as an escape, but as a sacred space for self-exploration. And it requires the courage to face the parts of ourselves that we would rather keep hidden. Because the truth is this: you are not just the light. You are also the darkness. You are not just the persona you present to the world. You are also the raw, untamed self beneath. And the more you deny this, the more fragmented you become. But the more you embrace it, the more you integrate the shadow, the more whole you become. So ask yourself, what parts of yourself have you been running from? What truths have you buried, afraid to face? And are you ready to step into solitude, not to escape, but to finally meet the self that has been waiting for you in the dark? From the moment we enter the world, we are part of something larger than ourselves. We are born into families, into cultures, into systems of beliefs that shape the way we see reality. We are taught how to behave, what to value, what to strive for. And in this process, we begin to forget that there was ever an alternative. The collective becomes the foundation of our identity, the structure that tells us who we are and what our place is in the world. But deep within, there is another force, a quiet and persistent whisper, the self, longing to break free. This is the eternal struggle, the pull of belonging versus the call of solitude, the desire to fit in versus the need to become who we truly are. Carl Jung understood this conflict better than most. He saw how society molds the individual, how it creates masks and expectations that can never truly capture the depths of the human soul. He knew that most people live as fragments of themselves, adapting to the collective at the cost of their own authenticity. Because the truth is, society does not reward those who step outside the boundaries. It does not celebrate those who reject the rules, who carve their own path. It fears them. To be different is to risk rejection. To stand alone is to risk loneliness. And so, many choose the comfort of conformity over the terrifying, uncertain path of self-discovery. But what is lost in this trade? What happens to the parts of ourselves that do not fit into the collective mold? They are buried, repressed, denied. The artist suppresses their creativity to pursue a practical career. The dreamer silences their visions to meet the expectations of their family. The thinker holds back their deeper questions for fear of being misunderstood. And yet, these denied aspects never truly disappear. They linger beneath the surface, creating a quiet, persistent dissatisfaction. They manifest as anxiety, as frustration, as an unshakable feeling that something essential has been lost. This is why solitude is not just a luxury, it is a necessity. It is in solitude that we reclaim what the collective has taken. Jung believed that true individuation, the process of becoming a whole, authentic being, requires a conscious withdrawal from the collective. This does not mean rejecting society entirely. It does not mean becoming a hermit or turning away from human connection. It means stepping outside the noise long enough to hear your own voice. It means questioning the beliefs you have inherited, asking whether they are truly your own. It means facing the uncomfortable truth that much of what you have accepted as you may be nothing more than a reflection of the world around you. And this is not an easy process, because to step away from the collective is to enter the unknown. It is to walk a path without guarantees, without validation, without the reassurance of belonging. It is to become an outsider, if only for a time. And few are willing to take that risk. But those who do, those who embrace solitude as a tool for self-discovery, find something invaluable. They find the self that was hidden beneath years of conditioning. They find clarity, depth, and a sense of purpose that cannot be dictated by anyone else. They learn to engage with the world not as passive participants, but as individuals who have chosen their own way. And when they return to the collective, they do so not as followers, but as those who have something real to offer. Wisdom, insight, and the strength that comes from knowing who they truly are. Because the paradox is this: only by stepping away from the collective can we learn how to exist within it without losing ourselves. Only by embracing solitude can we engage with the world from a place of authenticity rather than conformity. And so the question remains: are you living a life that is truly your own, or are you simply following the path that was given to you? Have you taken the time to listen to the voice beneath the noise? Or have you drowned it out with the expectations of others? The struggle between society and the self is not one that can be avoided. It is a battle that plays out within each of us, shaping the course of our lives in ways we rarely acknowledge. And the choice is always there: conformity or authenticity, belonging or truth. Which path will you choose? There comes a moment in solitude when something shifts. At first, there is resistance, the discomfort of silence, the weight of your own thoughts pressing down on you. The mind reaches for distractions, craving the noise of the world, the familiar rhythm of routine. But if you remain still long enough, if you allow yourself to sit in the vastness of solitude without running from it, something remarkable happens. The discomfort fades, and in its place, a new awareness emerges. You begin to see yourself with a clarity that was once impossible. The layers of conditioning, the expectations, the voices of others, all of it begins to dissolve. And beneath it, something truer, something deeper, begins to surface. Carl Jung believed that solitude was not just an escape from the world, but a crucible for transformation. He saw it as a space where the soul undergoes a kind of alchemy, where raw, unprocessed aspects of the self are melted down and reshaped into something new. In solitude, the unconscious mind speaks in ways it never could in the presence of others. Dreams become more vivid, memories long forgotten rise to the surface. Emotions that were once buried demand to be felt. And if you listen, if you truly surrender to this process, you begin to understand that solitude is not empty. It is full of insights waiting to be uncovered, full of truths waiting to be realized. It is in solitude that the deepest work of the soul takes place. This transformation does not happen through force. You cannot rush it, nor can you control what emerges. You might enter solitude expecting peace, only to be confronted with long-buried pain. You might seek clarity, only to be met with confusion. But this is the nature of true inner work. It does not follow a straight path. Like the alchemists who sought to transform lead into gold, the process is unpredictable, requiring patience, surrender, and a willingness to face whatever arises. And in time, something begins to change. The parts of yourself that once felt fractured start to integrate. The wounds you thought would never heal begin to close. The emotions you feared begin to lose their hold over you. And in their place, a quiet strength begins to take root. Jung often spoke of individuation, the journey of becoming one's true self, as a process of inner unification. And solitude is where this process unfolds. In the stillness, you come to recognize not only your light, but also your darkness. You begin to embrace the contradictions within you, understanding that they are not weaknesses but essential pieces of who you are. You learn that the parts of yourself you once rejected, the fears, the desires, the doubts, are not obstacles but guides. They point the way toward wholeness. And as you integrate them, you emerge from solitude not as someone who has escaped the world, but as someone who has been reborn within it. The transformation that occurs in solitude is not meant to keep you isolated. It is meant to prepare you for the world in a new way. Because once you have faced yourself, once you have truly seen what lies beneath the surface, you can no longer be controlled by external forces. You are no longer bound by the opinions of others, no longer swayed by the pressures of society. You move through life with a new sense of clarity, rooted in something deeper than fleeting validation or approval. You no longer seek meaning outside of yourself because you have found it within. This is the gift of solitude. It is not loneliness. It is not exile. It is a return to yourself, to your essence, to the truth that was always there, waiting to be uncovered. And so, the question is not whether you can handle solitude. The question is whether you are willing to step into it, whether you are willing to let it break you open, to let it strip away the illusions, to let it reveal to you who you truly are. Because solitude is not where you lose yourself. It is where you finally meet yourself. Solitude is not isolation. It is transformation. It is the space where the self is rediscovered, where the masks fall away, where the soul finds its way back to wholeness. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He knew that without solitude, we remain trapped in the expectations of the world, never truly knowing who we are beneath it all. But for those who are willing to step into the silence, who are willing to face the unknown within themselves, solitude becomes the most powerful teacher. It is where you confront your fears, integrate your shadow, and emerge not as a fragmented version of yourself, but as something complete, something real. If this video resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. It helps us continue creating content that challenges the way we think and see the world. We post new videos every day, exploring the depths of philosophy, psychology, and self-discovery. And if you're looking to dive even deeper, check out the link in the description and the pinned comment. There, you'll find a selection of powerful books that can guide you on your journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep becoming.